Welcome to the 2021 Queen's Park Tribute to Ontario Holocaust Survivors. My name is Fran Sunshine, and I am the National Chair of the Canadian Society for Yad Vashem. Today, I join you from the Greater Toronto Area Holocaust Memorial Site at Earl Bales Park. The Holocaust Memorial Site was dedicated in 1991. It was designed as a permanent reminder of the Holocaust's devastating toll on humanity and to show the triumph of spirit of those who survived. Our site tells the story of the Holocaust and contains almost 5,000 names of Holocaust victims and survivors. We are now completing the construction of 2 new walls, which is right behind me, and the creation of a youth Holocaust education program that will include experiential and online learning opportunities for students on site. I urge you and your families to take the time to visit our Holocaust Memorial. For over a decade, the Canadian Society for Yad Vashem has been privileged to host the annual tribute to Holocaust survivors in collaboration with the Government of Ontario, which recognizes the achievement of Holocaust survivors in Ontario. For the second year in a row, we are proud to present this year's ceremony online as part of Holocaust Education Week, an annual event organized by the Chaim and Sarah Neuberger Holocaust Memorial Center. Today, we are fortunate to have family and friends viewing this ceremony from around the world. The theme of this year's tribute to Holocaust survivors is Witnesses to History, sharing their stories. Our ceremony is focused on the reasons why survivors began to speak and share their life story and why it's important for their testimonies to be continued to be shared. This theme was inspired by our honourees. Each of them has been involved with the Chaim and Sarah Neuberger's Holocaust Center or the Azrieli Foundation Memoirs program. They have seen it as their sacred responsibility to keep the memories of the Holocaust alive, to tell their personal stories to groups large and small, and to engage with the media. We take this opportunity to thank everyone who has participated in the ceremony and thank you all for joining us.
Ontario will always stand with our Jewish community. I'm humbled to join the Canadian Society for Yad Vashem in paying tribute to this year's honorees who continue to share their stories with us to this day. I'm truly inspired by your tremendous strength, resilience, and bravery. You're all true heroes. This tribute serves as a reminder about how we must come together and always remain on guard when it comes to defending fundamental rights and freedoms. As Premier, I will continue to fight anti-Semitism and hatred in all its forms. Let's continue working together to build a better, safer, and more inclusive Ontario for everyone. And I speak for all Ontarians when I say, never again. Thank you and God bless.
Shalom. I've been given the distinct privilege to share a few words on behalf of the State of Israel in tribute to Ontario Holocaust survivors. The Holocaust is a very personal topic for me. My 4 grandparents were Jews from Poland who immigrated to Israel before the Nazi invasion. After the Holocaust, they were alone in the world. Their entire families were wiped out. They came from large, warm, and happy families, and no one was left but them. Their parents, their brothers, their sisters, over 30 innocent souls were all murdered in the death camps. Since I've arrived in Canada nearly 2 months ago, I've been stunned by the daily occurrence of anti-Semitic activities, such as weekly hatred demonstrations and rallies with anti-Semitism masquerading as anti-Zionism. Coinciding with the federal elections, we saw a campaign signs defaced with swastikas, Jewish neighborhoods and institutions hit with Nazi symbols and other obscene graffiti intended to intimidate Jews. Unprovoked, hate-motivated assaults, such as a man who performed a Nazi salute before assaulting a woman he presumed was Jewish in Toronto subway station. And even 2 NDP election candidates were made to resign after a discovery of their social media posts. One was asking, was Auschwitz a real place? And the other spreading modern-day blood libel regarding Israel and the COVID-19 vaccines. Just the other week, the Toronto District School Board hosted a guest speaker who chose to divert his presentation to teachers about anti-Black racism to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, portraying Jews as white supremacists and thieves. We must not be silent or idle in the face of hatred and intolerance. This is why the mission of Yad Vashem is so relevant. Anti-Semitism may have morphed into new forms, such as anti-Zionism, but it is still very much embedded in our daily lives. What we are witnessing today also underscores the significance of the work done by the Canadian Society of Yad Vashem in advancing education and commemoration of the Holocaust. The Consulate General of Israel is honored to partner with the Canadian Society of Yad Vashem in hosting Righteous Amongst the Nations ceremonies. The next one is scheduled for November for a Canadian of Dutch descent whose family received Righteous Among the Nations honor, recognized for putting their own safety in jeopardy to help Jews during the Holocaust. To the Holocaust survivors, thank you for your courage and resilience. You are truly the backbone of the Jewish community. By retelling your story and educating youth, you are combating modern-day anti-Semitism and enhancing the connection between generations. You are the light that ensures that darkness can never return. I wish you many years of good health.
What does it mean to live life that inspires? What does it mean to be inspired by that life? It inspires one to hold the memory of 6 million in one's consciousness, even when you're unaware of it. It inspires you to deeply connect to your Jewish tradition. It inspires a Jew to love life despite its adversity. My mother, who grew up in Kiev after the World War II, spent her childhood years only 15 minutes walking distance from the gruesome site of Babi Yar, where in 1941, Nazis, along with their collaborators, shot in a massive grave 34,000 Jews. Jews were gathered, stripped, and murdered. The huge ravine where this murder took place was not marked by the Soviets, but neighbors and Jews who returned to Kiev after the war knew what took place. One year, at the anniversary of this massacre, my mother, only about 10 years old, trailed after her oldest sister and her friends to the site of Babi Yar. There, among the trees, Jews hid and recited Kaddish over the ravine. Some just stood in silence. That year, in the fall, the rains were so heavy in Kiev, it flooded the streets and ran over to the ravine. It upturned the soil and the shallow sand, revealing what no child should ever see. My mother saw a blonde braid and a blue ribbon attached to it. This memory has never left her. You, the survivors, who knew the faces of your brothers and sisters, your families, your grandparents and your parents, knew the face that braided this braid and knew the delicate features of a girl that wore it. Who can live with such knowledge? What strength and courage does one have to possess to go on and not be consumed by it? Despite your pain and anger and flashbacks and undeserved guilt, you build the life worthy to emulate. You build your families and our Jewish community of Canada. What does it mean to live in the presence of your inspiring life? It is to see those blue ribbon dart and weave itself through the fabric of my own life. I never lit Shabbat candles alone. Somewhere between day and night, as I lit, a child runs through my house. At times I see this ribbon dart. When I dance with the Torah on my shoulder, accompanied by my Darchei Noam community and Simchat Torah, sometimes I catch a glance of this ribbon floating through the air. Every time I teach someone to put on the talit and wrap myself in it, the blue tachelet is always present. Every Jewish text I've ever learned and taught, every melody I sing, the ribbon morphs into a notebook, or at times into a note, at times unobtrusively, and at times very clear. Living with your life as inspiration guides me and my Darchei Noam people to battle Jewish apathy, ignorance, to teach, to celebrate our Jewish life, to be a human being, to be a mensch, to be strong. Dear survivors and your families, you built our Jewish community of Toronto. You build it with courage, defiance, and wisdom, and an ultimate message for us all. L'chaim, to life.
Prayer in place of mourner's Kaddish. Ribono shel olam, Elohei aruchot lechol basar. Master of the world, God of the spirit of all flesh, it is revealed and known before you that it is our fervent desire to praise your name and to remember and honor the martyrs of the Holocaust by reciting the mourner's Kaddish in the company of a minyan. Though circumstances prevent us from doing so, may our yearning and prayers find favor in your eyes and be accepted and received before you as if we had prayed that Kaddish. May you grant hope and healing to all who suffer. And may we soon be able to once again safely gather in holiness and joy. May your name, Adonai, be elevated and sanctified everywhere on earth, and may peace reign everywhere.
Thank you to Premier Ford, Consul General Idit Shamir, Rabbi Tina Grimberg, and Cantor Tibor Kavori for making our online ceremony so meaningful. We extend our sincere appreciation to Premier Ford and to the Government of Ontario for the support of this important annual event. We also thank his staff for their efforts, especially during these very challenging times. Today, we celebrate the accomplishments of 9 very special honorees who rebuilt their post-war lives in Ontario. Our honorees were born in 6 different countries: Czech Republic, Hungary, the Netherlands, Poland, Romania, and Slovakia. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we visited each of our honorees and their families to present the certificates to them, all while safely distancing. As you will see, these were very emotional, heartwarming visits. As in past years, our honorees will be introduced by provincial politicians and representing various parties and ridings.
During the ceremonies with each of the 9 honorees, a certificate was presented to each honoree from Ontario Premier Doug Ford. The certificate reads as follows. I am honored to join the Canadian Society for Yad Vashem in paying tribute to the tremendous courage, strength, and bravery of Shary Fine, Melvin Goldberg, Leslie Fazekas, Bianka Kraszewski, Leslie Mezei, Miriam Mozes, Magda Sebestien, Vladimir Sebestien, and Leonard Vis, Holocaust survivors, November 2nd, 2021. Few of us will understand the unparalleled cruelty and suffering that you and your fellow Holocaust survivors experience. Your story serves as a powerful reminder of the obligation to learn from this dark chapter in human history and to be vigilant against all forms of bigotry and to build a world without prejudice and hate. Today, we recognize and honor you in this annual tribute to Holocaust survivors. Your spirit prevailed in the darkest of times, and your story will live on for generations to come. Please accept my sincere best wishes. Signed, Doug Ford, Premier of Ontario.
I am touched to be included again this year in the annual tribute to Holocaust survivors. Today, I have the honor of telling the incredible story of Bianka Kraszewski. Bianka Kraszewski was born in Warsaw, Poland in 1929 and grew up in Lodz. Her family escaped Lodz at the beginning of the war and fled to her grandmother's apartment in Warsaw. This part of Warsaw was subsequently incorporated into the Warsaw Ghetto. In 1943, her brother Richard was forcibly taken to a concentration camp where he was killed. Bianka and her parents escaped to the Aryan side of the Warsaw Ghetto, where they were hidden by Christian people. At first, Bianka was hidden with her parents, but was later hidden alone. In February 1944, her parents were betrayed and then killed along with the man who had been hiding them. Bianka remained in hiding and later took part in the Warsaw Uprising as a 15-year-old. She was eventually taken to a transit camp and survived the remainder of the war under a false name and traveling with strangers. An orphan after the war, she lived in Poland and then immigrated to Scotland in 1946 with her cousin Gubrish to join their uncle Leon. In Glasgow, Bianka went to high school and university, where she earned her master's degree in French and German. She met her future husband, Ludek, and they immigrated to Canada, where Bianka's uncle Leon had moved in 1951. Bianka and Ludek married on September 4th, 1951. They lived in Oakville, Hamilton, and Toronto before resettling in Oakville, where they raised their 2 daughters, Renata and Tamara. Bianka took night classes in Spanish at the University of Toronto, earned her master's in Spanish, and completed the courses for her PhD. She taught Spanish to adults in Oakville. Bianka also worked as a court interpreter in Polish and Spanish across Ontario and for the Immigration and Refugee Board in Toronto. Bianka belonged to Toronto's Child Survivors Group for Hidden Children and spoke at schools to educate students about the Holocaust for many years. Bianka Kraszewski lives in Oakville.
I am pleased to present this certificate to Bianka Kraszewski.
Thank you.
I'll hold that for
I would like to thank the Government of Ontario for bestowing this honor on me. I would also like to thank Yad Vashem for this honor and the Government of Canada for taking me in as a young woman. I'm a hidden child survivor that has her mother and father to thank for keeping me safe during the war until they and my brother were killed. I wish that they could have known that I survived. I met my late husband in Scotland, and we came to Canada and were married. We built a peaceful life here and raised 2 wonderful daughters and 3 grandchildren. Every survivor lives for their children and grandchildren, and I have been very lucky to have both. Canada gave my family all kinds of opportunities. I was able to complete my master's and PhD degrees here and to use my linguistic skills in 5 languages as a court interpreter and a teacher. My family and I are so fortunate to have lived here all these decades. Over the years, I've spoken about my experiences during the Holocaust in elementary schools and high schools, in a synagogue, in the greater Oakville area, and in Toronto. I wanted the children and youth to know the history of the Jewish people in the war and not to forget the atrocities that were committed against innocent people. It's my sincere hope that young people will speak out against all forms of hate and prejudice. Thank you again.
It is my great honor to participate in the annual tribute to Holocaust survivors. Today, I am pleased to join the online ceremony to introduce honoree Leonard Vis. Leonard Vis was born in 1930 in Amsterdam into a traditional, upper-middle-class Orthodox household. His father, Moritz, was an independent manufacturer's representative in the textile industry. His mother, Franziska, was a homemaker. He also has a brother, Arthur, and sister, Anita. After the attack on the Netherlands by Germany in 1940, the family thought it prudent to move to a smaller town, Bussum, outside of Amsterdam. Discrimination against the Jews started almost at once. In August 1941, Leonard was forced to change to a separate school, staffed exclusively by Jewish teachers. In May 1942, they were forced to wear the infamous yellow star. In June 1942, the family was forced to resettle back in Amsterdam. With the help of some family friends, Leonard was able to go into hiding in August 1942. His brother and sister had gone before him in July. His parents followed by going into hiding a week later. During this time, raids and roundups of Jews became an almost daily occurrence in the city. When the Netherlands was liberated by Canadian forces in May 1945, the whole family had, thankfully, survived the war. Very few Jewish families survived. More than 80% of the Jewish population had perished at the hands of the Nazis and their anti-Semitic helpers. Leonard completed his education, served for 2 years in the Netherlands Army, and upon his discharge left for the United States. Barely 6 months into his new life in the States, he was drafted into the American Army for a 2-year tour. A job offer brought him to New York. Later, an even more interesting offer lured him away to Young and Rubicam, the advertising agency. He came to Toronto on an assignment in 1967, where he met and married Dorothy. They left for a very extended honeymoon in Holland, where Leonard had secured a position with an international advertising agency. They returned to Toronto in 1974. Leonard had never been very vocal about his wartime experiences, but that changed when he was asked to speak at the Anne Frank exhibit in 1988. He then joined the Survivors Speakers Bureau of the Holocaust Center of Toronto, and he has been telling his tale ever since. He concentrates on the Holocaust in Holland. In 1999, the couple who sheltered him, his war parents, were awarded the coveted Medal for Righteous Among the Nations from Yad Vashem, the Israeli Holocaust Remembrance Authority.
I'm pleased to present this certificate to Leonard Vis.
I would like to say a few words when I am accepting this singular honor. We from Holland tend to read our emotions from a piece of paper. And it will be far from me not to be a good Dutchman and read my emotions from a piece of paper. First of all, let me thank you, the representatives of Yad Vashem, the province of Ontario, and all those who have contributed to the singular honor that is bestowed on me today. I'm deeply touched. Who am I to deserve this exceptional tribute? I will accept it though, and with great gratitude, as I want to share it with all those who managed to safeguard me, a Jewish kid, during the Holocaust. This unique catastrophe, the war against the Jews. Their names mean little to you. To me, their names and activities meant life, hope, and survival. The mere fact of surviving the Shoah, the Holocaust, puts a moral onus on the survivor. Some acknowledge this quickly, for others it takes longer, but everyone at some time will do their best to handle the task. I lost my youth, all 5 years of it. I left my native country, Holland, after having completed my education and my military service for the United States. There was quickly drafted in the army and completed a full 2-year stint and became a US citizen in the process. Why am I telling you all this? As a speaker for the Friends of Simon Wiesenthal organization, I present my survival of the Shoah in terms that resonate with my young audiences. What did I learn from my experiences as a persecuted youngster between the ages of 9 and 15? And how did it eventually facilitate my growing up? I call it life lessons and street smarts from the Holocaust. Knowledge and lore that your parents do not know and thus cannot teach you. But it is so important that it may save your skin in a dire strait. In that sense, I feel that I may deserve the honor you are according me today, and again, I want to thank you sincerely. Thanks to you all, and especially to my wife Dorothy, who can tell you that being married to a Holocaust survivor requires some very special qualities. As I say to my young audience, do not keep the faith, spread it. Goodbye, and good luck.
It gives me great pleasure to tell the unforgettable story of honoree Leslie Fazekas. Leslie Fazekas was born in Debrecen, Hungary in 1925 and started his schooling there. After 12 years, in May 1943, he finished high school. In March 1944, Nazi Germany occupied Hungary. In July of that year, Leslie and his family were transported in a locked cattle car to Strassow, Germany, with other Jews from the ghetto of Debrecen. His father, Brother George, and Leslie were all directed to be night workers for Sauerwerke, which was a tank factory. His mother worked in the kitchen. In April 1945, Leslie and his family were liberated by the Red Army. Soon after liberation, Leslie went to Budapest to study in a technical university to become a mechanical engineer. He married his sweetheart Judy and decided together to start a family. They had 2 sons, Peter and George, who were born in 1951 and 1955. Tragically, Leslie lost his father and brother in 1955, within a week of each other. In October of '56, a revolution broke out in Hungary, and that opened borders that were previously closed. The family decided to leave Hungary and build a new home and a new life here in Canada. In a new country, everything was unknown, different, and strange. The skills he'd learned in Hungary were no longer relevant. A plant engineer with Hungarian experience was not needed in Canada. He was hired instead as a draftsman at the Trans-Canada Pipeline and worked there for 2.5 years. In that time, Leslie learned to speak English, and he took a computer course at the University of Toronto to earn more money. During this time as well, his wife Judy was a photo retoucher. She approached photo shops, and since she provided good work, people brought her their photo negatives. Judy worked at home so she could take care of their children. After leaving the Trans-Canada Pipeline, Leslie was employed at a small but advanced management consulting company called KCS. In 1968, the Ontario government wanted to introduce a health system called OHIP. He asked for an interview and was employed to participate in that program. In 1974, Leslie received his MBA degree and joined the hospital finance sector. Finally, after 20 years of service, he retired with a full pension.
I am pleased to present this certificate to Leslie Fazekas.
My name is Leslie Fazekas. and I am 96 years old. I was born in the small city of Debrecen in Hungary. I lived here for my first 31 years. In 1944, the Germans occupied Hungary. My parents, my 15-year-old brother, and I were deported to Vienna, where we made night work as a slave laborers in a large tank factory called the Sauerwerke. Decided to return to Hungary, where we prepared to live in a free country. We found a new leadership under the control of the Soviet Union, which created a terror street there. Nobody's life was safe. Then, in 1956, Hungary erupted in a popular revolution. The borders opened up, and the night walk through darkness, mud, cold, and fear took us to true freedom, took us to Canada. Canadian official met us upon our arrival. He gave everyone $5. In Hungary, it would have been a crime to have $5 bill. To me, that was a fortune. But the real fortune was the warm welcome we were given and the opportunity to give here in his great country and to raise a family and grandchildren and even great-grandchildren in the past 65 years. Thank you, Canada.
Magda Sebestien was born in Čekovce, Slovakia in 1928. After surviving the war in hiding with her immediate family, she continued her schooling in Košice. She graduated in 1948 and enrolled in the Faculty of Medicine at the University of Brno, completing her studies in 1953. Magda met her husband Vladimir in 1945 and they married in 1949. In 1954, their son Ivan was born. Tanya, their daughter, was born in 1962. Magda worked in pediatric cardiology until 1968, at which point she and her family fled to Vienna after the Soviet army invaded Czechoslovakia. In October 1968, they immigrated to Toronto. There, Magda worked to obtain her medical credentials, passing her licensing examination in 1971. She worked at Women's College Hospital, where she became acting chief of the Department of Neonatology for 2 years, and she opened a private practice in 1975. Magda retired in 1999 and enjoys spending time with her family, especially her 2 grandchildren. Magda Sebestien lives in Toronto.
I am pleased to present this certificate to Magda Sebestien.
We thank you very much. We thank the Yad Vashem, and we thank the Ontario and the Canadian government. I understand that it's very, very important that our experiences, unfortunately, there are less and less of us who really have been survivors, and it shouldn't be forgotten for the sake of the future generations.
I'm very pleased to recount the story of honoree Vladimir Sebestien. Earlier in this tribute, you learned the story of his wife Magda, and now you will learn his. Vladimir Sebestien was born on June 24, 1927 in Brno, Czech Republic. His hometown was formerly Czechoslovakia, and it is where he spent his early childhood. In March of 1939, the Nazis occupied Czechoslovakia. They arrested Vladimir's father, a medical doctor who was known for his anti-Hitler stance. He was jailed for several months. After his release, the family fled to what had become Czech Protectorate and moved to Uzhhorod, a city in current Ukraine. The family lived in Uzhhorod until early 1944. The city had a quite large Jewish population, which suffered under a gradually increasing anti-Semitic attitude in Hungary. In early 1944, the entire Jewish population was forced into the city's brick factory. After several weeks, they were mass transported to Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp in Poland. Vladimir's grandmother died in the Birkenau gas chambers the first day after arrival. Vladimir and his father spent the rest of the war in various Nazi concentration camps. They survived Auschwitz-Birkenau, Mauthausen, and two subcamps of Mauthausen, Melk and Ebensee. Vladimir's mother was sent to other concentration camps and did not survive. After liberation of concentration camp Ebensee by the U.S. Army, Vladimir returned to Brno with his father. There he decided to pursue his education in electrical engineering. During this time, he got acquainted with Magda. They fell in love and married in 1949. In 1953, they moved to Košice, Slovakia, where their two children, Ivan and Tanya, were born. Vladimir worked as an electrical engineer and Magda became a doctor of pediatrics. In 1968, the Soviet Army and its subservient satellites invaded Czechoslovakia to save the oppressive communist regime from a wave of ongoing democratic reforms. Vladimir and Magda decided to leave the country and immigrate to Canada. They were met with a wave of general sympathy towards immigrants from Czechoslovakia. When Vladimir's family arrived, they received help and encouragement from non-Jewish friends. The support by the Canadian government helped significantly to overcome the initial hardships of immigration. These actions will never be forgotten by Vladimir and Magda. Vladimir found work in his engineering profession with the Ontario government, where he worked until his retirement in 1993. Magda worked for years at Women's College Hospital and ran a private medical practice until 1999. They are both enjoying their retirement and the successes of their two talented grandchildren, Matthew and Jessica.
I am pleased to present this certificate to Vladimir Sebestien.
Thank you very much. I am truly honored, and I thank the Yad Vashem, and I thank the Ontario government and the Canadian government as well. I think it's very important that the survivors, their significance of the story and of what happened during the Second World War doesn't get forgotten through those years. And unfortunately, there are less and less of us who were true witnesses of those horrible times. So thank you again for everything.
I am honored and privileged to recognize Melvin Goldberg. He has an incredible story. Melvin was born Mendel Gwiazda, the son of Elka née Goldberg and Anshel Gwiazda, in the summer of 1942 in Białorusska, Poland. Białorusska was a small town of approximately 3,000 people, half of whom were Jewish. By then, the Jewish population of Białorusska was confined to an open ghetto patrolled by 6 Jewish policemen. His father dealt in cattle hides, and one of his customers and friends, a Polish shoemaker, took him out of the ghetto and sheltered him. He was hidden with his family, and although they were not well off, they cared for him. In October of 1942, the ghetto was liquidated, and all of the inhabitants, including his parents, a sister, and 2 brothers, were murdered in Treblinka. In March of 1945, he was taken to the Jewish Agency in Warsaw and then sent to the Children's Home in Otwock, where he remained until April 1948, when a social worker took him to Gdansk, where he was put on a boat bound for New York. He was met there and taken to Toronto by a relative, Wolfie Goldberg, who with his wife Tilly adopted him. Melvin spoke only Polish and in September 1948 was enrolled in elementary school. He went on to high school, where he received an Ontario scholarship and then attended the University of Toronto, where he graduated in engineering science and medicine. He He began practicing as a doctor in 1970 and retired in 2019. In 1977, he married Marilyn Yolis, and they have a daughter, Kara, and son, Daniel. It was not until 2013 that he discovered the name of the family that had hidden him. He was then able to nominate them for the Righteous Among the Nations Award. It was at the occasion of the presentation of that award in Warsaw in June of 2014 that he first reconnected with the daughter of his rescuers.
I am pleased to present this certificate to Melvin Goldberg.
Thank you. I arrived in Canada in 1948. I was a hidden child. The Holocaust was not a very pleasant time, and I was very young. I was completely dependent on people that I didn't know at all. It was a time where Nazi ideals were paramount, and people who objected were objecting to racism and bigotry. In June of 2014, I was able to present a medal for Righteous Among the Nations to the daughter of my rescuers, and it was an honor to do so. I know that the government of Ontario and Yad Vashem presents these awards, and I am very pleased to be able to accept. Thank you.
It is my great pleasure and honor to introduce honoree Miriam Mozes. Miriam Mozes was born in the town of Hode Mezei, Vásárhely, Hungary, in 1931. One of her earliest memories are of the warm and comforting feeling she had surrounded by her close-knit family in her home. Her father, Tibor, was a prominent businessman who owned a large factory with many workers. Her mother, Margaret Barony, was an elegant and poised woman who was a doting mother, doting on Miriam and her brother Andrew. By early 1940s, Hungary declared cooperation with Nazi Germany. Anti-Semitism and violence against Jews became more common. No one would have ever predicted the future to come. In 1942, Miriam was still able to join and attend a new private girls' school. The school offered superior education, and Miriam was proud to be accepted. Yet, anti-Semitic regulations still existed, and Tibor and Margaret were required to pay 5 times the tuition of any non-Jewish girl. While attending the school, Miriam was given the nickname Kish Jidau, meaning little Jew. One of the most traumatic memories Miriam has is still vivid to this day. Her family was sitting around the Shabbat table when suddenly there was a pounding at the door and shouts of the Germans. They had come for her father Tibor and told him he had to go with them. There were no goodbyes. That was the last time Miriam saw her beloved father Tibor, who was taken from his family at 32. He was sent to a forced labor battalion and never returned. Miriam, her mother, and Andrew were still living in their home until early 1944. They forced the 3 of them to move into a tiny office in the back of their home's building. There was no bathroom and only 1 bed. Then, in June 1944, they were sent in cattle cars to an Austrian labor camp. Miriam underwent the humiliating arrival antics of the Nazis. In March 1945, Miriam, her mother, and Andrew were sent on a death march from Linz to Theresienstadt. For 3 weeks, they marched on the long and grueling trip. After 3 months in the camp, the Russian army liberated all of them. During this time, her mother's unwavering optimism and faith carried and supported her family. That spring, she married Leslie Mozes, who was also a Holocaust survivor. He lost his parents, brother, and most of his extended family. He was the head of a youth Zionist movement and gathered many to immigrate with him to Israel. Leslie and Miriam left Hungary for Israel in January 1950 through a harrowing experience. In Israel, the two wed and had 2 children, Ofer and Oret. Soon after, they moved to Haifa to allow Miriam to follow her dream of going to university. That fall, she was accepted into the Technion University for chemical engineering. In 1966, Miriam and her family moved to London, England, where she had been awarded a scholarship to earn her PhD in physical chemistry at the Queen Mary University of London. In 1970, Miriam and her family moved to Toronto to reunite with her brother Andrew. And there, Miriam had her 3rd child, Annette. Miriam worked and became the head of the Pollution Abatement Research Group at Ontario Hydro. She became the first female engineer in the research division. An avid environmentalist, Miriam had a successful 25-year career at Ontario Hydro. Leslie sadly passed away in 2000, and Miriam now lives in Toronto and has 3 children and 6 grandchildren.
I am pleased to present this certificate to Miriam Mozes.
Yeah, thank you very much. I would like to thank the Society for Yad Vashem and the Government of Ontario for granting me this honor. It is a small acknowledgement of the terrible times that my family and I had to endure during the World War II. I hope that my story will continue to educate and serve as a memory of the horrible crimes committed against the Jews during the Holocaust. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for asking me to participate in the 2021 tribute to Holocaust survivors. It gives me great pleasure to introduce honoree Leslie Mezei. Leslie Mezei was born in 1931 in Godolo, Hungary. He and his 4 siblings survived the Holocaust. Unfortunately, his father was killed in Auschwitz. Leslie spent time after the war in displaced person camps and was on the Exodus 1947 ship, which was turned back from Palestine and returned to Germany. He arrived in Canada in January 1948 and graduated from McGill University in Montreal in 1953 with an honors in mathematics and physics. He then moved to Toronto and married Anna Wasserman, a Holocaust survivor from Poland. After Anna died in January 1977 from a brain tumor, Leslie left the university where he was teaching computer science and changed careers to become a personal financial planner and married Kathy Cross Mezei. They have 5 children, 10 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren between them. Leslie has written A Tapestry of Survival, his family's Holocaust stories and his experiences since the war in Canada. His talks to students, which he calls From the Holocaust to Unity in Diversity, follow the 3-part motto of the Azrieli Foundation, the publisher of his book. Know the past, heal the present, and enhance the future. Leslie works on overcoming the increasing anti-Semitism and all other forms of bigotry of our time, seeking unity through interfaith, interspiritual, and pluralism movements. He is constantly grateful for the opportunities Canada has given him.
I'm pleased to present this certificate to Leslie Mezei.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you to the Government of Ontario and to the Yad Vashem Foundation for this tribute. I've had the good fortune for the last 68 years to live in Ontario and to have had so many opportunities for education, for various jobs, and for volunteer work, especially in the interfaith community. And more recently, when my book about the Holocaust story of my family came out, A Tapestry of Survival, I had the opportunity to see many groups, and especially students, and teach them not only about the Holocaust, but about the importance to be against anti-Semitism, all forms of bigotry and racism, and also to work towards this wonderful Canadian multiculturalism, pluralism, in the spirit of unity in diversity. Thank you.
It's my great honor to introduce Shary Fine. Shary was born on April 1st, 1927 in Bistrița, Romania. She's a survivor with a number on her forearm, A18731. Growing up, she was a gymnast, mountain climber, and acted in local plays. Her family were observant Jews who celebrated big life events by going to synagogue. As a result of the increasing number of anti-Jewish laws in Hungary in the build-up to the war, Shary was thrown out of school at the age of 7. Her family's possessions were stolen over time by the local Nazis, and their lives became increasingly difficult and full of anxiety. Finally, in the spring of 1944, Shary and her family were deported in cattle cars to Auschwitz-Birkenau. Her parents were murdered upon arrival, whereas Shary, her brother, and 2 sisters were selected as slave laborers. She stayed there for about a month and was then sent with her sisters to the Krakow-Plaszow concentration camp in Plaszow, Poland, where Schindler's factory was situated. She worked in the stone quarry for a few months, but when the Russian army began to close in, Shary and her sisters were sent back to Auschwitz-Birkenau. From there, they were sent to the Black Forest area near Stuttgart, in Germany, where Shary worked as a machinist in a munitions factory. All this time, they were repeatedly beaten, received little food, and had inadequate clothes and poor shelter. Fewer than 10% survived. From there, as the front moved closer to where Shary and her sisters were located, they were driven on a forced 3-week march toward the Alps. Shary was finally liberated with her sisters on April 29, 1945, by the American 7th Army. Her brother also survived the war. After the war was over, Shary lived in Germany in a displaced persons camp until 1948. In 1948, she immigrated to Canada and married her husband, George Fine, and they had 3 sons. Shary's happy marriage with George lasted for 70 years until his passing in 2020. Shary's lifelong ambition was and is dedicated to physical fitness. She had started gymnastics at the age of 6 and continued after the war. She was a certified fitness instructor and worked at the YMHA in Montreal and the YMCA in Ottawa for a total of 41 years. Shary is grateful to Canada for giving her citizenship and the opportunity to build a life after her experiences during the Holocaust.
I am pleased to present this certificate to Shary Fine.
Thank you. Well, it's a little short story why I am in Canada. I was in Auschwitz twice, unfortunately, after I've been in Poland where they filmed the Schindler's List. And I was working in a stone quarry, barefoot. Well, it wasn't very easy. And then I went back to Auschwitz because the Russians were coming closer to Poland. And so here I am the second time in Auschwitz. Well, I knew Auschwitz very well. I knew the crematorium. I knew where it's what. And there was a big barrack, and it was called Canada, with a K. And it had an awful lot of shoes and clothes and everything. And I said, if I could only get in there and get a pair of shoes. But, of course, that was impossible. But if the war is over and I am surviving, which of course it was almost a dream. I'm going to go to Canada. They must have a lot of shoes there. The dream came true, and I got my certificate, and yes, I could go to Canada and be a domestic. And you know what? I am very grateful for Canada to be here. My dream came true.
A prayer in memory of the 6 million.
El male rachamim, shochein ba'melomim, dayan almanot v'aviyetomim, Mezei menucha nechona tachat kanfei השכינה במעלות קדושים וטהורים כזוהר הרקיע מאירים ומזהירים לנשמות ששת המיליונים אחינו ואחיותינו רבבות בית ישראל אנשים, נשים וטף שנהרגו, שנשחטו, שנשרפו, שנחנקו, שנטבעו ושנקברו חיים בידי הנאצים ועוזריהם יימח שמם, ושהלכו לעולמם על קידוש השם. בעבור שאנו מתפללים לעילוי נשמותיהם, לכן בעל הרחמים יסתירם בסתר כנפיך לעולמים. ביצור החיים את נשמותיהם, אדוני יבוא נחלתם בגן עדן תהא מנוחתם, וינוחו בשלום על משכבם, ונאמר Amen.
Thank you for joining the Canadian Society for Yad Vashem and the Government of Ontario for the 2021 online tribute to Holocaust survivors. May we all be inspired to renew our commitment to passing on the universal lessons of the Holocaust and to providing meaningful Holocaust education and commemoration to our children and grandchildren and to future generations. Thank you so much for joining us.